All right.
All right. I don't know exactly when it starts. I don't want my intro to cut off. So I usually ramble for a few seconds before I say, hello, everybody, and welcome. I am your host, Eric Smith, and we're going to jump straight into my favorite horror with author. He's the subject of a documentary. He's written some of my favorite characters ever. His favorite color is green. It's Joe R. Lansdale.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing fine. Now that I've got my time straight, I was looking for you this morning, as I told you, and because I had it in mind, it was 8 in the morning because I used to do most of my events in the morning. So that's what got me confused.
Well, I never know if I'm going to be scheduled to work on Saturday mornings. So I typically schedule things for in the evening. I did not work this morning, but I was at my my nephew's until about 4 in the morning. So, or I was at his place late, got up or went to bed at 4 in the morning. So I wasn't up until after 9 and saw a bunch of emails, but we're here now. And generally I have an idea of what I want to do, but I just discovered something that sort of threw things out the window. I was looking over, I have some of your things here to kind of show off. And I was looking over this little ditty right here.
Yes.
Tarzan, The Lost Adventure,
right.
Dark Horse Comics. And I noticed, I don't know how well this is going to show up. I noticed the cover artist's signature. I had no idea that Arthur, I don't know how you say his last name, Sodam, was the cover artist for these books. And I love that cover.
It's got different interior artists, but yes.
But I have a quilt that's covered with his artwork.
I see that. Yeah.
So we're going to start with this.
Okay.
And right inside, it says Tarzan, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs, adapted and expanded by Joe R. Lansdale. So exactly what did you do for this 4-part story that was released by Dark Horse? What does adapted and expanded
at that time
mean?
Right. At that time, Jerry Prosser was the editor at Dark Horse for this kind of project. And we were talking on the phone. I think we were actually talking about another project. At some point they did the Bob Bizarre Hands, Joe R. Lansdale's Bob Bizarre Hands comics, and they were doing that. And we were talking, and I'm not sure exactly, he must have brought it up for a reason, but he was talking about Tarzan, that they had acquired the rights for Tarzan. And he said, we're going to try to get someone to do a Tarzan novel. I said, man, that's great. You need to get Philip Jose Farmer. And I said, he would be perfect for it. He's great. And they said, well, yeah, but we were actually thinking about you. And I thought, well, fuck Philip Jose Farmer. I'm ready to do it. And Phil's a friend, or was a friend, and also one of my favorite, he is my favorite science fiction writer, and a big influence on me in many, many ways. And but I joked with Phil about that later. I said, yeah, I was all for you till they mentioned me, and I was in the hell with you, man. I'm doing Tarzan. And then he later on did an original adaptation that they, sanctioned for from Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated. But what had happened is that when Edgar Rice Burroughs died, he left I think about and I may be wrong on the page count, but something like 70, 80 pages in his vault, or safe as they called it. And it had been there for years, and they wanted someone to actually finish it. And so they sent me the pages, and I read it. And first of all, I'm a big Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. I've loved Burroughs since I was a child. Comic books are probably the reason I wanted to write, but he was the reason I had to write. And I read him a little later on when I was 11, but by 4, I was already trying to do comics. And then when I came across him, I said, this is it. I'm sold, And times have changed with Burroughs, but his, I still, in my heart, he's my, I guess you would say my sympathetic favorite, and always will be. And so this opportunity was exciting to me. And I got the 80 pages, and to be perfectly honest, they weren't that great. There was a reason they were in the safe. There was a reason that he never finished it. And if he'd have finished it, he might have changed it. But it lacked a lot of things. For one thing, he was whacking a panther or a lion on every other chapter, and so that was not all that interesting. And but the basic storyline was there, and so I lifted sections, and I had to invent sections to set things up for a full novel. But I would also move some of his stuff to later spots in the novel. So a lot of people say, well, I just got rid of his stuff, but I didn't. I used a large percentage of it. I just didn't use it all in sequence. And because the story in sequence would have been a series of him whacking lions and panthers, and things of that nature. And as I think Jerry Prosser says, no wonder that, the animals are beginning to be scarce. Tarzan was killing them all, And so anyway, I continued it, and I picked up on the kind of ideas for things he did, like for Tarzan the Terrible, which was, Paul Don, and then things where he had more fantastic elements in it. And I had a lost civilization, which was, of course, not new to Burroughs. There was a lost civilization in a large percentage of his work. And I sort of created a menacing character that, someone may read it, so I don't want to, blow it all. I know that they're going to get back to reprinting it. And so I wanted to end it in Pellucidar, because Tarzan at the Earth's Core is probably my second favorite Tarzan novel, with the first one being the first Tarzan novel, Tarzan of the Apes. But they couldn't be farther apart. One is somewhat semi-realistic, and the other is a more fantastical one, dealing with Pellucidar, David Ennis, and at the Earth's core, so to speak. So I felt like that if I ever got the chance to write another, I was going to pick up there with him at the Earth's core, but that didn't happen. I did write a Tarzan novella later and put him in The Land That Time Forgot. And I wrote a John Carter of Mars piece for another anthology that they did. But that's how it happened. I actually don't know if they had me in mind. They must have, or he wouldn't have called me that day. And we were talking, but he didn't really say that, because he was talking like, who would you pick? And I said, Farmer. And he said, well, we were actually thinking about you. So he was probably messing with me. But I was very excited, and I feel honored to have done that. And so I can honestly say I'm one of the few writers that actually collaborated with Burroughs, and probably the only one who openly collaborated with Burroughs on Tarzan.
Very nice, very nice.
Fritz Leiber did an original based on a Tarzan film, and then Farmer did one, but I actually got to collaborate with Burroughs. I can say that. And he was easy to work with, very easy to work with.
I bet. Didn't give you a lot of notes.
No grief.
I'm a huge Burroughs fan, huge Tarzan fan. This would have been an instant buy for me anyway, but to have your name on it just upped the ante.
Thank you. So, have you seen the hardback?
I have not.
Beautiful.
I haven't. I just, these are first printings.
And a paperback. There's a hardback, paperback.
So I've got all four, which actually I just.
Yeah, that's the pulp ones, and then they did a hardback of it, then they did a paperback.
Very nice. I'm looking at my Edgar Rice Burroughs over here, and I can barely make out. There's the Bane. I think that's the publisher. How you pronounce it?
Yes.
Worlds of Edgar Rice Burroughs. Is that one that you have a story in? Okay.
I am in that. Yes. Yeah. And then the other one was the Under the Moons of Mars, which was the original title for Princess of Mars. Yeah. And so they did an anthology titled that, and I did a John Carter story.
Now, is Tarzan your favorite Burroughs character, or is it someone else? No.
John Carter of Mars is my favorite, and then Tarzan, and then probably David Ennis. And my, I love the world of Mars, that he created, Barsoom. And after that, I probably like Pellucidar best. But Tarzan is my second favorite character that he produced, and then probably David Ennis and that whole Pellucidar, creation. And then you got Carson Napier, and things like that, and the Mucker, and so many other. I probably read them all. If I've missed something, it's not much.
I wanted my Tarzans to be of a set, the same covers, and the At the Earth's Core was Tarzan at the Earth's Core was the most difficult one to find. A lot of them
Yeah.
picked up at
Yeah.
half price books, and I'd find things here and there, but that one
I've got several copies, but mine are paperbacks. I was also buying some when they first came out. When they started doing the Valentine editions of different Tarzan things and stuff of that, I bought those. And before that, I was picking up Ace, and those weren't that. Some of them were new, and some of them weren't, but a few years old then, comparatively anyway. Now, of course, it's different. And but I have a large collection of Burroughs, and I have special editions and all kinds of stuff. Nowhere near what is available. And I'm not a collector per se. I'm a collector of books and stories. I'm not necessarily a collector of special editions and stuff like that. But because of my career, I have a lot of them. I've been given a lot, and I've bought a lot. And Burroughs is one of the exceptions I make to try to get special editions.
Well, I believe
I have a signed Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Oh, nice.
And Maureen O'Sullivan, who played Jane, also signed it. It's
very
I think it's Tarzan of the Apes.
Yeah. I believe there's a new edition set coming out with Joe Jusko covers. That looked very cool to me. That's if I were going to spend
I like his stuff
and get a new set, that would be the one. He showed
right.
I haven't seen it on Facebook lately, but he was showing like the preliminary sketches and then sort of the progress for each cover as he was working on them.
I don't know if is he the one. I don't know if he's doing. They're also doing a new At the Earth's Core. There's a God, I can't believe I'm having to blank on the publisher right now, but he does these beautiful editions of Burroughs with all kinds of special items inside. Pens that were similar to the pens that Burroughs. Well, it's made like the pen that Burroughs used to sign, write with, and then it's got copies of like contracts or maybe copies of actual pages, and they're coming in a big box set. And so those are the ones that like I said, I don't do much collecting, but I do make an exception with Burroughs.
Yeah, those are cool. I think the most recent Tarzan related thing I got was I don't remember the exact title, but basically it's called Tarzan versus Kong.
Oh, okay, I know of it. Yeah.
Which is I haven't read it yet, but I believe it's when they were transporting Kong back to New York, they had to make a stop in Africa.
Yeah.
And so Kong and Tarzan meet. It's the
same. I've been talked to about doing more Burroughs things, so I may in the future. It's just it's hard for me to afford the time, and the truth of the matter is it's kind of sad, but Burroughs is not as popular as he once was. So it's not like people are knocking the doors down to read a new Tarzan book. So it's really a dedicated readership and a dedicated authorship of the people that are doing these things for Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated. And I know I could do more, but like I said, I just don't have time to do as much as I would like. But I just feel so grateful for what I have done.
Well, if you ever get the chance to do more, I'll be first in line to pick it up.
Thank you.
So you've got the Tarzan. You did a Batman novel.
I did too. I did a young adult Batman novel as well. And it was the same company, Warner. Let's see. It was called Terror on the High Skies, I think is what it was, or something like that. Okay. Yeah, Terror on the High Skies. And I did Batman the Animated Series. I wrote 3 of those and 1 of Batman and Robin Adventures. And I did a Son of Batman animated film. And Superman as well.
If I'm not mistaken, a Jonah Hex.
I did a lot of
short
stuff.
Cartoon.
Yeah, well, that's part of the animated series. That's called Showdown. That's the 3rd one I did.
But so generally, I feel you have a style or voice, but with something like this,
I think that's fair.
Something like these, your voice doesn't necessarily come through because you're doing, of course, Edgar Rice Burroughs, something with Batman. Do you find it? Do you have any problem getting into the mindset of writing in, again, especially with the Tarzan, someone else's voice, or can you slip into that?
Well, Burroughs, my first novels and stories I wrote were Burroughs pastiches when I was a child. In fact, one of them I revised and finished up when I was grown, and it appeared Michael Moorcock and I both had a story in a kind of modern pulp magazine. I cannot remember what it was called, but they did both of our stories in it. And mine was called, let's see, what was it? Under the Warrior Star, I think is what it was. And it was very much a Burroughs pastiche because I wrote most of it when I was 11, 12, and 13. And so Burroughs was not hard for me to slip into because of that. And I did another Burroughs pastiche for George Martin, George R. R. Martin, where I think it was called The Wizard of the Trees. And so I did that, and it was fairly easy for me to get into the Burroughs voice and have fun, as much as I can do it. I think I did it justice, and I think I did it reasonably well. And it was easier for me to do the first person voices because I was such a John Carter fan, and a large percentage of those stories are told in first person, which is my favorite way of writing. And Tarzan generally wasn't. So it was a little more work there. And I didn't try to muffle my voice completely, but I tried to hold it back some. When I did the Batman, I didn't muffle my voice much there. It's still in those. It's got that kind of wild, takeoff on it, because Batman doesn't really have a particular voice.
Sure.
It's so many people have written about him and so many different versions. You might say that about Tarzan too, but otherwise in the books, though, Burroughs had a definitive voice.
Great. Excuse me. Now I'm going to share something. I've shared this on Facebook before, but you are an author whom I was a fan of before I knew I was your fan. And that's
Okay.
because I had a subscription to Twilight Zone magazine.
Oh,
And
yeah.
read it every month. And then I read this. And a
Yep.
couple of the stories, I said, wait a minute, I've read these stories before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other, John Skip and Craig Spector are the same way. When I read some of their short stories in Deadlines, I was like, wait, I read these.
Right.
I like this stuff.
Dan Simmons' first story was in Twilight Zone. Dan Simmons' first story, and a lot of people started there, or at least early in their career, wrote for it.
That magazine was so great. And
it was one of my, it is my all-time favorite magazine that I ever wrote for, and especially when Ted Klein was editor. It's not that the other people, didn't do a good job, but he and I were more simpatico. He certainly turned down stories of mine, and he turned down one, and my wife said, no, that's a good story. She rewrote it. We sent it back as a collaboration, and he bought it. And it's called Change of Lifestyle. And I wrote an article for him called Hell Through the Windshield. And so he was an editor that I got Ted, and he got me. And he wrote a totally different kind of story than I was writing there. But I was early in my career, and I don't think they realized I could do other stuff. And so I was kind of known as the guy who did the absurdist, off the wall short fiction, but I could do other things. And then gradually, of course, I revealed that with other anthologies and magazines and what have you. But I really liked the Ted Klein period at Twilight Zone.
Such a great magazine. The other thing that stands out for me from that magazine was Stephen King's article about Evil Dead.
Yes, I remember that. That's why I went to see it, or why I rented it to see it. I couldn't go see it.
I actually saw it at the drive-in and didn't realize back then, my friends and I would just go to the drive-in in a couple of cars. We'd put blankets out between the cars and just kind of party. We'd have beer in the trunk,
right,
and we'd just goof around, not too out of hand. And one night we were there, and I looked up, and I just became mesmerized, and I was like, holy shit, this is the movie Stephen King was writing about in Twilight Zone magazine. Right. And I just sat.
Well, I did see it at drive-ins later, but the first time I saw it was actually a video. I rented it, and then they started, as it became popular, they would play it at drive-ins, usually, with another film. But yeah, it was an amazing film. And my son, who was probably too young to see those things, but in our house, we kind of knew, they grew up with this, and they knew special effects, and they knew acting, and they, directors came to the house, and actors came to the house, and artists came to the house. So we always had people back and forth and staying with us a few days or longer. And so I didn't feel too bad about him seeing it. but he became a big fan and he loved Bruce Campbell. And he was ecstatic when Bruce later did Bubba Hotep. And of course, he got to know Bruce, and that really made it, a special event for him, because he's a big fan of Bruce as an actor, and now he is as a person.
That's yeah. I love Bruce. He makes those movies. Well, he and Sam Raimi's
He's a
director.
great guy. He's a wonderful guy. I got to meet Ossie Davis too, and I was ecstatic, because I was a big fan of Ossie's for many reasons.
I'm a big fan of the story Bubba Hotep. I have
Thank you.
I have the book with that and the prequel. The other story is a prequel.
Oh, yeah, Bubba and the Cosmic Bloodsuckers.
And of course, I have
It's possibly a prequel, or it's part of his imagination.
Yes, and I do have the movie, of course. Absolutely love that.
There's a comic. There's a comic of Bubba Hotep and the Cosmic Bloodsuckers.
Oh,
and there's a crossover Bubba and Evil Dead comic.
Nice. Evil Dead crosses over with a lot of stuff, apparently.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I have a little table here with a few of your things on it. I couldn't fit everything that I have. There's
a lot of it.
There's Zeppelin's West and those, and some things you've done with other members of your family. I have Casey's book.
Yeah.
Casey, wonderful singer. And I have the book, the Case book. One with John.
My brother. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then
that's my brother. Yeah.
Keith, something with Keith somewhere. I can't see everything.
We did Big Lizard. Yeah. And we did some other stuff together, some script work for comics. We did X-Files and different things like that. He's done a lot of comics on his own, and then he's done some with me, and he's written a couple of movies that have been filmed, and he's got option a screenplay, and I think he's got some other short story coming out, and I think and he's done some scripts for this new thing coming out called Tales of the Razor, which is comics. I think they're put together 6 issues. None of it's come out yet, but forthcoming.
So the whole Lansdale family is just keeping busy.
Pretty much. And my wife, and their mother managed all my career and all of the early career of Casey. And I think Keith pretty much took care of his own. But when Casey was young, she started out as a professional singer at about 17, 18 years old. I forget exactly, but she was young. And then when she got older, she took that over. But Karen did all that. And Karen wrote a couple of short stories with me, and we collaborated them, and we co-edited Dark at Heart, which she did a lot of the real grunt work in that, to be honest. And and my son and I did an anthology together, and my daughter has done an anthology in which I appear called Impossible Monsters, and a lot of great writers in that one. There's some really good people, and me.
Great. Excuse me, pardon me. I want to talk a little bit about Cold in July. Right. I absolutely love this book.
Thank you.
But I've read it a few times, and I have a question about the main character's occupation, essentially, if I'm remembering things correctly. Because at one point when I reread this, I was a professional picture framer. So it didn't really register the first time I read it, but then reading it again, I was like, wait a minute, I know what's going on here now. But for something like this, how do you pick? Is it just random? You're like, what job is this guy gonna have? Or what made it a picture frame shop?
No, in this case, one of my best friends, Bob Laborde, he's a deceased now, but he was older man than me anyway. And he had a frame shop downtown here in Nacogdoches. And I used to go down there to visit him, and he would do the frames, and he would tell me how he was doing them. I certainly didn't become any framing expert, but I picked up enough little pieces here and there to, borrow it for the novel and for the main character's profession. And I just thought it was an interesting thing for him to be a good common working man with something that takes a lot more skill than people have any idea, and I have another friend now who is a professional framer and works at a gallery. And so if I had if he'd had that gallery then, I would probably known even more. But Bob Laborde, also Laborde supplies the name of the town. It's named after Bob, my friend Bob. And so that's where it came from.
All right. Yeah, that was I loved that job. It's probably the favorite my favorite job I've ever had.
It's fascinating, really. Yeah.
I learned a lot of tricks. And yeah, it just got to be creative. It was a lot of fun. And then it was, like I said, rereading this as I'm going, and I remembered the important story beats, but that wasn't something that I had remembered. And I got to that part and I was like, hey, that's me.
Yeah.
And of course adapted into a movie.
Yeah, but that was because I knew Bob Laborde.
Just since I said this is one of my favorites, I think my favorite is Sunset and Sawdust.
Thank you. I like that one myself.
I actually love that book. I couldn't put my finger on why, because I love so much of it.
It's one of those too that's had film interest back and forth. It's been optioned maybe 4 or 5 times, but something always falls through. I've had so many books optioned over the years. The Thicket with Peter Dinklage was supposed to be made up until just recently, and finally that collapsed. And it was under option for, I think, 9 years, something like that. Edge of Dark Water, I think, was 8 years. And The Bottoms, Bill Paxton had that for years. And before that, another producer that Bill and I were working with had it. And then, it changed, but Bill, and then when it was just me and Bill, it was a free option and we had a handshake deal, but I wouldn't have shook hands with almost anybody else. Bruce Campbell, I would, and a few others, a few other people I know, I would, James Purefoy, people like that, I would shake hands with him and the deal's real, but I wouldn't do it with anybody else. And Bill was somebody that I just dearly, dearly loved. And I felt like the world got cheated when he died.
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned James Purefoy, who played one of my favorite pulp characters of all time, Solomon Kane.
Yeah, I like that too. I knew you were going to say that because, a lot of people didn't like that film, but I did. I mean, it's a little different than the books, but I thought that James was a terrific Solomon Kane. He looked the part. He embodied the part, I thought, beautifully. And I think it's one of the underrated films of that sword and sorcery genre, and he told me that they at one point were talking to him about doing a TV series, but it never manifested. And I think too, he might have thought that he'd gotten a little old to play the part or something. I don't know that he really was, but at one point, I think there was interest in a television series.
Well, I would love to see that. And especially not with all the streaming services and these amazing shows that are coming out. Kane is my favorite Robert E. Howard character.
He's a good one.
And
he's an influence a little bit on one of my characters, the Reverend Mercer, who is a preacher who travels the West. But there is some, not a whole lot, but the basic concept is similar. And I'm sure that having read all those things, that was imprinted in the back of my brain. We're all influenced. There's a difference in influence and stealing, but we all steal concepts and principles from a lot of different writers. It's when you steal their stories or somehow don't dress their stories up enough to make them feel different. But Solomon Kane was a big influence on Reverend Mercer, who was dead in the West, and numerous other novellas about him, a short story or two.
Have that over there on the shelf. You mentioned, making comics and things when you were younger, and as a kid,
yes,
I made my own comics, and I still have a handwritten Solomon Kane story that I wrote.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I wish I'd have kept a lot of stuff like that I had, I kept that one Burroughs pastiche that I was writing, and I was glad I did. But I had an old short story, and I had a play, and a couple of other things and the very first thing I ever wrote was a poem. And I don't consider myself a particularly interested poet or a great poet or a mediocre poet, but I did do a book of poetry. And so, I wish I had all that stuff. It'd be fun to have just from nostalgia, but you get older, you go, wow, that stuff I did as a kid, throw it out.
I was in the service, and I had a briefcase that I would keep stories that I was writing, different things in it. And when I got out of the service, that briefcase just sort of got put away and
Yeah.
didn't touch it for decades. So it's in my closet, still with all of that stuff from decades ago. I have, so like that story's in there, a few other stories, some rejection letters, because I did try to submit. I have a rejection letter from Weird Tales
Yeah.
and a few others. None of it's any good when I look back at it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that briefcase is sort of a time capsule from the late 80s, early 90s, and my time in the service and when I was writing things. Actually, I spent a year in Iceland, and
I had a briefcase as well. Yeah.
Excuse me. I had come up with, I wanted to do a cartoon to submit to Twilight Zone magazine, which I never did. But when I was in Iceland, I had a friend there who was a amateur filmmaker. He had a little video camera. He'd run around making little films, and he actually made a film out of this idea I had for this little cartoon strip while we were up in Iceland with horrible special effects. There was a UFO that was just paper plates, that written UFO on the paper plates on strings. I get a writing credit in the film.
There you go.
But yeah, being up in Iceland, I spent a lot of nights sitting at a desk. So I did a lot of writing, and it's all in that briefcase, locked away.
Right. Well, yeah, we were there last year, we were in Iceland last year.
It was hopefully still a beautiful country. It was amazing when I was there.
It's a beautiful place. I'll be honest with you. I thought it was gorgeous, but it's too lonely for me. And I love trees, and we're kind of swampy and trees here. So I grew up in a different environment. So after a little while, I start getting that opposite of claustrophobia. It's like everything's out there, a lot of water,
a lot of empty space.
But it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous place. It's a special place. I can see how people could fall in love with it, especially since they have the penis museum. They have this guy has a museum that has a penis of every kind of creature there is. I think the only thing missing is a human penis, but I think they're still looking for volunteers.
It's funny. I used to have a picture that I took of this single tree in the middle of nothing, and I'd show it to people. I'd be like, "Yeah, this is the only tree in Iceland. The only one I saw the entire time I was there."
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to, I don't know if you would call this your greatest achievement, but the Hap and Leonard series. Possibly your most well-known, obviously made into a.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think they are. Yeah.
I pulled this one off the shelf because I actually read this one first. Didn't know there was a series. Absolutely love them. I always tell people, Hap and Leonard, two of my favorite characters ever. If you wrote a book with just them sitting at the kitchen table talking, I would love it. So when you wrote the first one, which is Savage Season, did you know that you were creating a series? Was it initially?
No idea. No, when I was younger, when I first started writing, I wanted to create a kind of detective series. That was an important thing to me in the 70s. I wrote some stories about a guy named Ray Slater for Mike Shane Mystery Magazine, and I thought, and then of course I outgrew those. I wasn't very good, and I thought I wanted to do that. Then at some point I thought a series might be a trap, and I didn't want to do that. But what happened is I had a 2-book contract at Bantam, and one of them was Cold in July, which you just had, and the other one was Savage Season. And and I left the characters there, I thought I was done with them. And I moved to Mysterious Press. And when I was at Mysterious Press, I wrote a book called Walls of Shadows. And when I turned it in, they were like, man, this is pretty dark. And I was thinking kind of the same, that maybe it was darker than I wanted to be right then. And I was going through a lot of stuff with my agent. My mother was ill. So I imagine a lot of that darkness went into that novel. And I was coming out of the horror field a little more. So a lot of those elements went into it. And so I told my editor, I said, you know what? I think I'm just going to write another novel. And so I went home, and in 4 months I wrote Mucho Mojo. And what happened is Hap never quit speaking to me. And that was part of the problem, is I never really thought I'd write a series, but the guy would not shut up. And so I wrote Mucho Mojo, and they loved it. And then I wrote Two Bear Mambo and Bad Chili and so on. And somewhere in between there, I wrote Freezer Burn and finally The Bottoms. But Bottoms is probably my most popular book. If I had to say single sales, it selling things, it's The Bottoms. I mean, collectively of the Hap and Leonard books, The Bottoms still sells more. Wow. And it's taught in colleges and some colleges and some high schools and things like that, which I'm sure helps. But Hap and Leonard's gaining though now. This is, in the past, and there's a lot more of them. There's 12 of them, and not to mention the short story collections. I think there are 4 or 5 of those. So, but I didn't know I was doing a series. And after I, wrote Mucho Mojo, I felt, oh my God, I do have a series characters, and I like these guys, and I want to know more about them. And so I've always written them when they spoke to me, which means that there were gaps in between when I didn't write about them. And I would not age them when I didn't write about them. I don't try to catch up. And that was in 1999. Now it's 2015. I don't worry about that. I just write the next one. And whatever time it is then, that's when it is. But they don't age. They're kind of like, they age up to a certain point, then they slow down. I'm going to age them more. They're in their 50s now, but they should be my age, which is 70 or a little bit older maybe. But that's how that happened. And then people loved them and they caught on. And I've been shocked at how well they've caught on overseas, especially in Italy. Italy, it's that's a big thing. It's Hap and Leonard. That's a big deal, and I'm very happy about that because I love my Italian readers. They're some of my favorite readers because they read so carefully. They're interesting. They have interesting takes on things, and so I enjoy that. But I'm sort of at a point that if I felt, I had to pick or choose one thing, I would pick them. But I like doing other things as well.
Well, it is nice that we get a Hap book, maybe 2, or Hap and Leonard book, maybe 2 Hap and Leonard books, and then something completely different and standalone, and then another Hap and Leonard, and then maybe 1 or 2 other things.
It keeps me from getting bored with them. And the thing about writing, and it's one of those things that I think a lot of people have a hard time embracing sometimes, but if you find an author you like, a lot of times what you want them to do is give you the exact same experience over and over. And I don't want that. I want something different. But when you have a series, there's going to be a certain amount of that, or it isn't a series. I've tried to take the characters in different places. I've used, the heist in Savage Season, the serial killer in Mucho Mojo, the bad town, and in Two Bear Mambo, and Bad Chili. I could go down the list. Each one of them is a little bit different. And I've dealt with social and issues to some extent. And I think that's one thing that makes them different, and one thing that makes them unique and memorable, and that they're on different sides of the fence on things, but neither one of them are extremely on either side of the fence. Maybe on certain issues here and there, but on the whole, Hap is kind of people say hippie, but he's not really a hippie. He's kind of like I was. I was a left-leaning socially, kind of a moderate on other things, and Leonard is a conservative, but he's more like a Reagan Republican, not where we are now with Republicans. Yes. It's all, or it just changes. But the thing is that they're different enough that it makes for an interesting contrast for some of the ideas and some of the things they discuss. And I find myself sometimes agreeing more with Leonard one time and then agreeing more with Hap the other, because in many ways, I'm both of them because I'm creating them. But I created Leonard out of several people that I knew, 1 or 2 in particular. And I also created Hap primarily out of me, but I borrow from other things. I mean, you couldn't say Hap is me, but I could say
Right.
that I'm a lot like Hap, or Hap's a lot like me, whichever way you want to look at it. And Leonard contains elements of me, but he's a lot like other people I grew up with when we could actually have different opinions and talk about it. Now the opinions are so extreme, and it's sort of like the less we know, the more we think we know. That's always one of the scary things, you know. And I think that's one of the things I like doing with them, is showing them that these guys have different viewpoints, but they can find that center. And they, at heart, they're really the same people. They're exactly the same people. And I probably model Leonard a little bit on my buddy Andrew Vax, who just recently died. It passed. But there were things that he would say that I thought were so smart and intelligent that I would borrow them for Leonard to some extent. Not that Vax was like Leonard particularly. I mean, obviously he was a white guy, but he was not, his politics weren't exactly the same, but he had that kind of clear-eyed view on things.
Yes.
He could look through crap, and I think that that's what I wanted. And I made Hap a little bit more sentimental and maybe even more introspective than I am. I think I'm probably somewhat introspective. I think writers often are, but I've made him even more so I would have those contrasts. But to me, they're my favorite characters. And my favorite novels are probably some of the standalones, but my favorite characters are Hap and Leonard, and some of them like Mucho Mojo, Two Bear Mambo, Rusty Puppy, Jack Rabbit Smile. Those are among my favorite books that I've written.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I like all of them. I loved writing about those guys. Oh, if somebody said, which is your favorite Hap and Leonard books, it'd actually be the 2 volumes of when they were younger. One of them is Blood and Lemonade, and the other one's of Mice and Minestrone. And those are actually my 2 favorite Hap and Leonard books.
Excuse me. Again, you mentioned social issues, and unfortunately, it feels sometimes like we're going backwards today. But back when you introduced Hap and Leonard, was there any pushback or negativity with the character of Leonard?
A little bit here and there, but the publishers, surprisingly, they got behind it. And I've had a number of interesting situations, and one I had when I was in Oklahoma signing in Tulsa, I believe it was. A young man came up to me and said, these books really changed my life. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, they let me let go of the hate. And I thought, well, and so it's about gays and Black people, things like that. And I thought, well, if I've done that for one person, it was worth it. And I like to think that over the years, I've received things from many people who said, I never really thought of it that way. And some people say, well, I love your stories. I identify more with Leonard than Hap. Then others I identify more with Hap than Leonard, or I love both of these guys, is the usual thing. And they can forgive the other guy for their differences because there's this connection between the two. And that's part of what I'm trying to say, is that you can be different if you're not different to the point to where it's all about hating people. And that's the whole point, And I think another thing that's appealing about them is they're not politically correct, but they're, I think their hearts are always in the right place. They're trying to get there. And of course, they're terribly flawed, because in the end, they're murderers. They kill people, but they don't do it just out of, for pleasure, but they get themselves into positions that are symbolic or metaphorical about their morality plays. They're not suggesting that people do this. And I think people are idiots that take everything literal. But conceptually, there's a literalness there. And that's that they're trying to set the world right. And they often fail, or they often cause more problems than they were trying to do. But, I try to distinguish the bad guys from the good guys without making black hat and white hat, And for me, they're a very, I guess that they're, catharsis for all that's going on all the time, going all the way back to when I wrote the first one, which I think was 89 or 90. I think I wrote it in 90, came out a little later, but it's been good for me. But I do look at it, and I remember there was a review, and it was of Devil Red, and in that one it was dealing with more of it wasn't as socially aware. It was dealing with other aspects, another kind of story. And I saw a review, and a good review, But he was saying, well, I think I know why Lansdale is doing this is because things have changed and, you know, the racial issues aren't the same. And I thought, that ain't right. I wish it were.
Yeah.
And then, of course, and there wasn't very long after that we had these upheavals that we've had. And it does feel like we're going backwards. And in some ways, we're having an extreme kickback on the left like we had in the 60s, of which I was growing up in the 60s and the early 70s. And I was part of the civil rights, people and anti-Vietnam War and all that. I was all part of that. And I feel like that a lot of, and you see people go, oh, the boomers, and they forget that the boomers were the ones that were doing civil rights and anti-war. And it's just like anything else. Some did, some didn't, some were left, some were right. It's always that way. It's not that simple. But I think we're going through a time that is similar to that. The only difference is that we have made steps forward for Blacks, gays, women, things like that, but we don't want them taken away from them. You know, we want that to continue.
Yes.
And that's what scares me. That's what worries me. And when people get more caught up in politically correct, ideas, I love, like, it's funny because I'll support what the woke people are saying, as they call themselves, if you're going to use that silly term, is that I can support what they want, but I don't have to support it with this kind of obsessive political correctness. You know, I'm looking for something where we can find that common ground. And it's one of the reasons now is that people don't find common ground. They're either over here or they're over there, and they're missing out. It's like when I was a child, you know, you had people that came through the 50s and 60s, and you had a popular term for the Negro was called colored. Well, that was, what was it, National Organization for Colored People, is what they called themselves. Well, that became unfashionable, but that didn't mean the older people who were using that were using it in a negative sense all the time,
Right.
And so on. And then Black or Afro-American, I don't know if anybody remembers that one, and African-American and all these things, but the terms themselves are less important than the intent, I mean, obviously there's mean-spirited racial epithets, and we're not talking about that. But I'm thinking people get caught up in these sort of things like that, which really are not quite what we need to be worrying about, or whether we can put fuck on our t-shirt. We need to be worrying about people and how people are treated and how we can come together, not how we can divide. And you have all these people like you're on their side, but they find every way they can to sort of alienate you, or at least attempt to. I don't get alienated because I get what's going on and I understand where they're coming from, but they don't understand where I'm coming from sometimes. And we're talking about the same thing and supporting the same ideas.
Yeah. Well, nice to hear there was some positivity, and you're changing people's minds.
It's amazing, actually, because sometimes you think it doesn't matter what you do, you don't change people's minds, and you probably don't argue with them. Right. Sometimes I've had discussions with people though, and years later I would realize, you know what, he was right. I learned something from that. And then another time people would come up and go, you know what, I thought about what you said, and I think you were right. So you should be learning from one another and listening to what people are saying, not waiting for your moment to get your talking point.
Right.
It's hard for us all to do sometimes.
Sure. Now, excuse me, this dry air. When you come up with an idea for a story, is it like, do you know this is going to be a Hap and Leonard story? Or do you're like, okay, I'm writing this crime novel, get started, and then say, you know what, this would work better with Hap and Leonard, I'm going to make it one of theirs, or vice versa? You always know where you're going, I guess, when you start.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think I'd do it that way with Hap and Leonard. It's funny. I have a hard time explaining exactly how I work, because I only write about 3 hours a day, and I usually get up in the morning and write, and by 3 hours or sometimes less, I'm done for the day. And I try to write 3 to 5 pages a day, and sometimes I'll get 10 or 15, but 3 to 5, if I get that, I feel like I'm a hero. And it keeps me from having to try to say, I've got to write a chapter today. And and then I'm just disappointed. Or I'll do really well 1 or 2 days writing 20, 30 pages every day, and then all of a sudden I'm worn out. So I find that I was better by trying to have this minimal amount, which was reasonable. And so when I got the others, that was just icing on the cake. And I do, when I'm writing a novel, I'll have days where I get 10 or 15 pages and I do one draft and one polish, but I rewrite as I go. So if you look at it that way, you could say I do multiple drafts. But as far as ideas go, with Hap and Leonard, I usually just sit down and I think for a minute and say, I take Hap's voice, which is similar to my own, and I just say a line, and then that line will lead to a second line, and then a third one. Then all of a sudden, characters will show up, and then the dialogue develops, and then the plot develops. But I don't plot anything before I start, or at least I haven't so far. If I found I couldn't do what I've been doing for years and years and years, because I started out trying to plot everything, and it just, as soon as I got it plotted, I was no longer interested in writing it. And so I think that my subconscious, though, plots these things ahead of me. I think it knows, but I'm conscious mind doesn't connect with it until that morning. And I get up and it tells me what I need for the day, and it tells me when to quit. I always pretty much quit with a little juice still there, so that the next morning I get up, it's sort of like sourdough starter. I've got something to build on, and it works that way for me. Now, when I do some novels, they may come more from an idea. Like when I did the Zeppelin's West, the whole idea was a parody and a pastiche and going over the top and writing them like comic books and just having fun. And so I kind of knew I was doing that, but I didn't know what was going to happen from one scene to the next. And some people don't like that, but in me, I love books that feel like they're naturally evolving.
Right.
And I know enough about fiction from having grown up and read it and continually reading it, that there's some part in the back of my mind that knows how to construct things. It knows that I need to drop this here. And sometimes I don't know what that means, but I think it may mean something. And I'll get over here and go, yeah, it did mean something. And now and again, I will go back and add something to strengthen this. But for the most part, stories just kind of roll out. Have I ever had problems writing some stuff? Yes, I've had some. They're one of the hardest novels I ever wrote was Moon Lake, and I don't know why. But it was. I would get up every morning and say, what am I doing this for? This isn't working. And when I got through with it, it's been one of the best, out of the chute than anything I've done in a while, and the others did fine, but this one really, came out swinging. And so you never know. You never know. If you feel good about something, that doesn't mean it's good. It probably is. But if you feel bad about something, but you're working hard on it and you're doing the best you can, you might be surprised. Some of the books I've felt that way about turned out to be some of my best. And some of them that I was having the most fun with weren't necessarily bad books by any means, but they weren't necessarily as maybe as what I thought they were going to be in the way, I was feeling at the time I was writing.
Well, I think one of your strengths, at least as a reader, to me, it's that, I love the Hap and Leonard books. I love the crime fiction books, but I also love the Zeppelin's West, the craziness of it, the drive-in stories.
And the drive-in are among my most original works.
Unfortunately, I used to have original copies of the first two, paperback copies. I do not anymore. So I have the relatively new one that has all three books in it. But I love that you can go from the crazy, the over the top, the bizarre, and then these great dark noir books. And I mean, the Hap and Leonard books can get dark, but they're a little lighter, I think, than not all of them, but a little lighter than some of the other crime fiction. And
I think so. Yeah.
You had mentioned earlier, some people just want their favorite authors to put out the same thing over and over. And that has never been what I wanted. I love someone who's giving me a variety.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Me too. I like that.
All right. So before we get to the main event, I have one more question, kind of out of left field.
Sure.
I think. And I'm going to start with when I read Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. I immediately got this Joe Lansdale feel. simply because his characters were so incredible, so realistic. And in my review, I said this, I felt like I was reading Lansdale, not because of the style or the voice or the story itself, just the depth and everything. So my question is, and again, this is just a weird question, I think, how do you feel being compared to other writers or having other writers compared to you? Is that something you've ever thought about? Is it something that bothers you? Don't care?
Well, sometimes it's aggravating, when you're perfectly good as Joe Lansdale to be compared to somebody else. But but I've always been quick to say, I love this writer and this writer influenced me, but I still feel like I'm doing my thing. And I think it's just natural that people want to do that. But more recently, in the last 10 years, they're comparing other writers to me. And I figure that's because you've lived long enough, that you've produced enough. And Cosby is one of those. And I know that he likes my work. I know that he's been influenced by my work because he said so. But he's doing his thing, and I admire that. And I'm happy to have that. Stephen Graham Jones, one of my favorites, has also said that, but he's doing his thing. But right. I think maybe the spirit of how I approach the work is what they're talking about. And I think a lot of people told me I didn't know you could do that until you did it. I didn't know that you could break those rules. I didn't know that there didn't have to be rules. I didn't know a lot of things, and I've always appreciated that. So the people that are influenced, I appreciate a lot. The people who influence me, I appreciate a lot. But I don't always think I'm another Elmore Leonard or another Kurt Vonnegut or whoever I'm being compared to in that moment, because it's been everybody. But if somebody says Mark Twain or Hemingway, well, that's enough in the past that you look at it and you go, okay, that's a generalization more.
I have said Mark Twain in regards to you.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite writers.
When I started reading your like really buying your stuff, reading it, getting into it, I see you, I get this feeling that you're a storyteller. I would get the feeling that I'm sitting at a campfire with you and you're spinning these yarns, right, which is the feeling that I would get from some Mark Twain. And so that's, again, I'm not comparing your writing to his writing.
Well, I grew up with Mark Twain.
The feeling that
I grew up with Mark Twain.
And again, that's
Twain and, all the classic writers like Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Kipling and Robert Louis Stevenson. And of course, I mentioned Burroughs because Burroughs was a pure storyteller. Later on, he got to where he was just hacking out the same stories over and over and over. And, just giving them a new name, but it was the same thing. He just ran out of plots. And I think finally it just became a business for him. But those early things he did, they're magical. They tap into something that's primal. And the thing I like about most of the writers I really like, it's the primal aspect. And some like Hemingway, I just like the way he has such lean description, but it lingers, and that is kind of a masculine poetry. And, people can make all the things they want about he did this or he did that. I don't care. All I'm thinking about is I read that prose, or I read a story like Hills Like White Elephants, or I read The Killers or things like that. I'm thinking, man, there's something going on there that I can't do. That's impressive. And F. Scott Fitzgerald, Diamond as Big as the Ritz and Ice Palace and all that. You read those and you can just chew the stories, they're that rich. And you read Faulkner and you just get overwhelmed, sometimes with the stream of consciousness. But still, it's fascinating. You read Flannery O'Connor, those are my people. I know those people, for better or for worse. She's accurate, she makes those people alive because she knows those people, and those people were still the same people that I grew up with in the South. There were a lot of good people and bad people, but that core feeling, she captures that. So those kind of things you borrow, and you borrow a feeling, you borrow a certain attitude. And Flannery in many ways is closer to almost the way that my momentum, for the way I write. And I think that's because her influences are a lot of mine, and that's the people I grew up with. That's how they talk, how they think, how they approach a story. And I grew up with my family, and my father in particular, and to some extent my grandmother and uncles were storytellers. they would sit around and tell stories. All the other kids are chasing fireflies, and I'm sitting there listening. I'm getting all these old West stories. I'm getting all of these ghost stories and all of these this happened to me stories. And I'm just absorbing all that. And I think it's one reason a large percentage of my work is in first person, because to me, first person was like the Burroughs stories. I believe John Carter was real on some level. When they told him first person, I believe David Ennis was real on some level. My logic told me otherwise, even as a kid, of course. But I think I'm not the only kid that went out and held his arms out wide to go to Mars. But I also realized that once I got there, that I wouldn't last 15 minutes. The Tharks would already have me done because I was 11 years old. But that first person is the most natural way to tell a story. And I think that's because when you're sitting around the campfire, you go, well, let me tell you what happened to me. I went saber-tooth hunting the other day, and I thought, well, this is scary. This is going to be bad. But then I saw a bear, and then that bear and that saber-tooth got into, and then you just keep going. And that's, to me, what real storytelling is about. And I've always felt that I'm a storyteller with a style. Literature has influenced I think the way I like to express myself in some ways, but the biggest influence is pure storytelling. And I've written stories that aren't in first person. I've written stories that are storytelling in third person, but when you do them in first person, you're closer to the old campfire. You're closer to that real voice that people use when they tell a story.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to move on to the main event now. So you picked for the movie we're going to talk about, the original let me check my dates here, 1956.
56.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Before we get into it, folks, I shouldn't have to say this for a movie made in 1956, but there will be spoilers. We're going to be talking about this movie. If you haven't seen it, pause this, go watch the movie, come back.
Yeah, definitely.
So first of all, can you just, in case there's anybody that hasn't seen it, can you give a quick synopsis of what Invasion of the Body Snatchers is?
I'll do my best. I saw the movie first. Let me say that first. Let me kind of preamble is that I saw the movie first, which led me to read the novel, which I loved. And then, of course, I saw the remakes and things later on too. And at least one of them with, Sullivan, Donald Sullivan and people like that. That's also an excellent version. But what it is that a guy that's a doctor in a small town meets someone who says, I don't think my Uncle Ira is my Uncle Ira. And he looks like Uncle Ira. He does the same things Uncle Ira does, but she just doesn't feel right about it. And in the book, I remember they're talking about a scar on the back of the neck. He said, when he got his hair cut, when his hair was out, you couldn't see that scar. When he got his hair cut, I checked. And the doctor says, well, what was there? No scar? He said, no, the scar was still there. But I don't think that's my Uncle Ira. And then gradually the next time, she's very satisfied that that's her Uncle Ira. And so gradually the people in town start telling this, so-and-so doesn't seem, he looks like so-and-so, but he doesn't seem like so-and-so. And then gradually the doctor and a few of the other characters in it begin to realize they aren't the same. They're changing. And gradually they discover that there are pods being placed in different locations by aliens who have taken on the same, their spores is what they are. They've come down from space as spores, and they take over the appearance and background and the information of the people they imitate, but they're not the same. They're colder. They don't have the emotional ties that we as humans do. Mm-hmm. And so the whole battle is that gradually realizing that they're trying to, keep from going to sleep, because if you go to sleep, that's when the pods take you over. And then they begin to absorb you, and then the pod becomes you. And so the whole storyline is about them trying to get away from there, trying to destroy the pods, trying to get to somebody to believe them. And I could go on a little bit more in detail, but I think that The basic premise is that whole concept about, you know, when you're growing up and your parents, you know them really well, and then maybe you have an alcoholic parent, for example.
Mhm.
That parent's not like they normally are. Or you have somebody with depression issues, or something in their life has happened that changes them. It's that same concept. Or if people want to carry it farther, they thought, you know, it's about the communist takeover that was forthcoming in the Cold War. You know, it's things like that. You can tag or McCarthyism, you know, about these people,
Right.
which is now. I mean, if ever there was a time right for a remake, it's now, because you look at some of these people and you call them, what are they, pod people? Now you hear that term all the time. I just knew so and so, and now they're into all these conspiracy theories, and they believe that, you know, that people are eating babies under a pizza parlor or whatever it was, and they're dead serious. You know, it's the sort of stuff that was the real fringe before, or that everybody would laugh at. And you look at that, and I start thinking it's just the opposite in some ways of the Body Snatchers, because instead of lacking emotion, they're nothing but emotion.
Right.
It's a reverse idea, but it's still that kind of the same way, is that people, you know, or people that you at least have some idea of, are no longer like what you thought. You know, I had people that were pro civil rights people in the late 60s and early 70s that are now, you know, talking about white power, people I have nothing to do with anymore. I think, wait, what happened?
Yes.
The pod people got them, but these pod people are angry and highly emotional pod people instead of the unemotional kind. So it's almost like they're too human. They're too easily influenced. They're too easily, you know, dependent upon an emotional reaction instead of a logical one. We all want to have emotion, and that's sort of like Body Snatchers is about. We want to retain love and all that. But here, if you look at it in the other extreme, it's that it's too much emotion. And so you're right for a kind of remake, but that's what it's about. It's about people who subtly are different. And you can tag all these other metaphorical aspects to it if you want, which is the great thing about that novel. Now, Jack Finney he claimed he didn't do any of that. He just wrote a story.
Right.
But that was in the air at the time. And so those things are absorbed, you know. And I noticed that sometimes in my books, especially the Hap and Leonard books, I'll think I'm just writing a story, and that's the main purpose. But I'll look at them and I'll see the elements of the era or the time or the moment in which those books were written absorbed into that story. You know, when I did Mucho Mojo, I was thinking about the South as I knew it, you know, and not everybody, you know, when you do these stories because they're crime stories, you're dealing with the negatives, not necessarily the positives, but you have to discuss the negatives to hope that you can make them more positive. So those things are absorbed. And writers and filmmakers and artists and creative people, the majority of them find that is pulled into their work, whether it's obvious or not. And sometimes it's very obvious.
Yes. Now I had not seen this in quite some time, so I watched it today to prepare for this, and we'll get to the end, but I think the version I watched has a different ending than the one I remember.
That's because you remember the ending that should be. And that's tacked on. I think that there may have been showings where they didn't have that little tacked on ending. But I remember when I saw it first time I saw it as a kid, when I saw it later, I thought, what's this thing on the end?
Yeah.
But what it is that I think your mind remembers the proper ending is when he pulls the tarp back and there are those pods. Yeah. And then later you have this thing where the army comes in and solves everything, which was very common for films of that era, you know. And what's interesting, there's a film called The Invaders from Mars. Right. Invaders from Mars came out in 1953. Finney wrote Body Snatchers. It came out in 55. Did he see Invaders from Mars? Because Invaders of Mars is actually the same storyline. Mm-hmm. It's not as good a film, though. Mm-hmm. I remember it very, you know, like sentimentally. I love it. First 20 minutes is outstanding. The very end of it's like an ad for the National Guard. But the thing about that film was that these Martians who lived underground or were hid underground because their saucers kind of like, you know, burned the dirt and sealed it over them. And they had a little thing, whoa, it would open up and people would fall down in it. And they had a drill, they would go to the back of their neck and leave a little mark on the back of their neck. And they would come back, and though they looked the same, they weren't the same. They were kind of like what the pod people were later. And I've always felt that that may have been an influence on Finney. Sure. I don't know that it was, but when you really think about it, it's very, very similar. So this sort of stuff was in the air at that time. And the ending that we were talking about, there's an ending after the ending. And I think most of us, when we first saw it, dismissed that because that's not the right ending. That other was. It's actually better than the book ending, the one where he pulls back the tarp. In the book, I don't know if you've read the book, but in the book, they just kind of, the seeds, the pollen, whatever this stuff is, just kind of leaves the earth, just goes away. And there's not a real satisfying explanation. And I sort of like that whole idea of them pulling back the tarp, and there they are, because you realize that this is going to spread. And it's just like this hysteria now, about whether it's about the election, whether it's about COVID or whatever it is, or whether it's about vaccination, pro or anti. It's that same thing. It's become this thing that's spreading that at first you think, oh, that can't be true. Nobody's going to believe that stupid shit. People, right. when I was growing up, we had vaccines all over the place. I never got smallpox, polio, the scarlet fever, any of that stuff, because I was vaccinated. And then now all of a sudden, there are all kinds of reasons they don't get vaccinated. I just find that kind of stuff so bizarre. It's like throw science out the window, throw history out the window, throw, your common sense out the window, and somehow trying to make it that this is my right to not do this, even if it kills somebody else. And when you're watching that invasion of the Body Snatchers, you're seeing that when he pulls back that tarp, that this isn't over. It's right. spreading. It's spreading like a disease. And in the remake, the Kaufman remake, that they win. And you definitively know they win. In the first one, or you can see that they're winning. Let's put it that way. And in the first one, if you end it where it's supposed to end, it's the same thing. The same thing.
Yeah, my brain is telling me it ends with him in the middle of the street screaming right. that they're going to get you and you.
They're going to get you.
That's the end. But I was watching it, and all of a sudden it goes back to him talking to the doctors, saying, "I'm not crazy. Right. This is what happened."
Right.
And they still think he's crazy.
Shows up.
Well, they bring someone in from a truck crash, and he's like, "Yeah, there was a crash. He's hurt." It was the weirdest thing. The truck spilled, and there were these pods.
Right, and so they know now that the government's going to bring the army or the law or whatever.
Yeah, he calls the FBI.
But I'm wondering if there was another version of it that we may have seen, and then this other one. But I think it may well be that we just didn't want that ending to be there. That's just not the right ending. Because I've heard other people say, no, that was always the ending, but everybody remembers it the other way. But I think there may well have been another version. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And somewhere it seems like in the back of my mind, I heard that when they showed it in Europe, that it ended the other way, without the tacked on aspect of it. But also in that period in time is that after World War II, our country was the greatest in everything. And I'm a big pro-American guy without being a pro-American idiot, And I back then we had the greatest army in the world. We had everything was the best, and we weren't going to be defeated by a bunch of monsters from outer space. That just wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And there were also codes in film, like when you had like Alfred Hitchcock, they always had to catch the villain in the end of the TV series. And sometimes he would tell you what happened in the end, so you wouldn't really remember that as the ending. And he did it in a jocular way, So it was kind of the code of the films of that era, I think, And I think it's interesting that the remake plays off all of the fads in the 70s of all of these primal scream and this kind of therapy and that kind of therapy. It's all the sort of stuff that, is like it hits a bump and then it's gone, but it's there for the moment, and everybody's grabbing onto this. It's like the fad of now is the QAnon for a lot of people, and it's a fad they believe, but it's still a fad, we hope. But maybe if it's not stopped, and you kind of get that feeling in the second version of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that this pure logic that these aliens have fits a lot of this sort of I'm okay, you're okay. In other words, there's no variation in us. We're all exactly the same personality wise, and you're going to lose your own consciousness and your own personality. And that's the scary thing in both of them, but they play it against each other. And then the other two versions are a little not worth speaking about, really.
The remake is Leonard Nimoy the Shrink in that one?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Donald Sutherland, I think, works for the health department, if I remember right. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I think in my own way, I honestly believe it's a great film. But what makes the first one the best, not only being first, I think the black and white element really gives it a noirish feel. And the idea of a small town where everybody knows one another, and everybody is used to how people act and how they are and how they live. And we all go to the same little stores and the same little bar and the same little, Christmas party and what have you, is to me scarier, because these are people, when you have San Francisco in the second one, you're looking at a lot more people that are disconnected, don't know one another. And I think it loses something there because it isn't as personal. You have the characters that he's friends with, that part's personal. That's true in the first one, especially. But in that first one, in that little town, Santa Mira, I think it's called. In that little town, they obviously know each other well. The doctor is like a regular guy around town. Everybody goes to him for whatever it is, a cough to having a baby. That's the guy. He was a general practitioner. Like there were a lot more of those when I was growing up. And so to me, I lived in a small town, much smaller than that one, but it hit home to me. And maybe it hits home to people that lived in cities more with the other, because that's their experience. But I think that they lose a little something when they do the city as compared to the smaller town, because of that intimacy that you expect, and it's lost. And the other, you don't necessarily expect the intimacy because it's a big city.
Right. Well, I think they set it up very nicely at the beginning of the film, because the doctor, played by Kevin McCarthy,
I love him.
Coming home early from a medical conference because he's had this rush of patients. And when he gets back to the town, and he's just, it's that greeting everybody on the street. Hey, Bob. Hey, Joe. Hey, how you doing? And everyone's friendly. And, but all of a sudden, now that he's back from the conference, all of a sudden he doesn't have all these patients. A few come in, but the rest are no, everything's fine now, because of course we learn they've been potted, as it were.
And the one that comes to see him, Uncle Ira is not Uncle Ira.
Right.
And I think they use Ira in the film. They did in the book. But Uncle Ira is not Uncle Ira. Well, Ira, that's somebody who has not yet been taken over, you know, and they will be. And so I think that made the whole thing scary, because, and I saw that when I was young, and the idea of people that you knew in a small town suddenly not being those people anymore really hit home with me. Or your parents or your uncles or whatever, not being them. Same way with like in Invaders from Mars, is that this is not them anymore. What happened? And then, wait a minute, I'm next.
Yeah. Well, he talks to Wilma, who says, Uncle, I can't tell you why. I don't know why, but Uncle Ira isn't Uncle Ira. And it's just, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to make an appointment with the psychiatrist for you. But it seems like a one-off to him until the little kid is brought in screaming, my mom's not my mom. And then he runs into the other doctor. And the other doctor's like, let me guess. You have a patient that says their wife isn't their wife and their sister's not their sister. And that's when he's like, there's something going on in this town. And I think it's very well done.
It is. And like I say, it's now, I meet people that I've known for years that are suddenly talking about Hillary Clinton and babies being eaten, or they're taking their blood. Hollywood people are taking their blood to, and I think I laugh. I think they're joking, and then you realize they're not joking.
Yeah.
They've actually bought into this, and it isn't just a few people out in the the weird sticks anymore, or somewhere somewhere else. It's a small fringe group. It's not a fringe group. It's still a fringe group comparatively, but it's a big fringe group. And if they don't necessarily believe that part of the conspiracy, they believe some other part of the conspiracy, and they buy into. And it's kind of a hunt and peck kind of conspiracy. You can find anything you want to believe in or anything you want to dismiss. So you've got this conspiracy that's sort of, one size fits all, even though there are variations within it. And it's the same feeling that you would get like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where you're somebody, you maybe hadn't seen them in a few months. Hey, how you doing? And you get to talking, and they start talking this weird stuff. And you're going, well, wait a minute now. What are you talking about? What's that? And then you understand they're dead serious.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like I was saying before, it's like the pod people got them, but it's the opposite of that dead calm and that sort of everybody's the same. It's just the opposite. Is everybody is not on my side is different, and we're all emotional, and we all get emotional within those frameworks. So I've always felt that they ought to make a film again of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and take it from that aspect, that it's just the opposite of this calm sort of thing. In some ways, the other one, if you look at it, and everybody was the same, at least everybody's the same, and they have no emotions, whatever. But this other is just a whack job sort of thing, and it's scary. And to me, it's scarier than even the Invasion of the Body Snatchers in its general meaning, or the original meaning in the film, because you're seeing this happen. You're seeing this happen right now, not in just a sort of, collective, philosophical way, but in a really, really dark, scary manner. People will now hurt people over having a different belief, and we're not just talking about white supremacists or the KKK. We're talking about people who normally you meet every day that work on your car or sell you your groceries or what have you, and it's just amazing to me that, and I can't see why people have chosen to be the happily stupid. They're not born stupid, but they've chosen to be stupid because this somehow fits some need that they have, or some way to explaining things that they're overwhelmed with. I don't know. I really don't.
Yeah. I could see that in a modern remake, where instead of that logical, no emotion, it's completely emotional irrationality.
Yeah, you have some of the most logical people, and in the film suddenly they're just the opposite. You have like college professors who are professors of logic and philosophy. Suddenly they're absolutely nutball. There's just something about that that's frightening. So yeah, I think there's a story there for you filmmakers out there that
the people
can get the rights to Jack Finney's novel.
The people at your local CVS stop giving out vaccines because now they're telling people it's got a tracker in it. I'm not going to be the government's lackey and put a tracker in you.
Yeah.
So we're not doing that anymore.
Right.
But just yesterday you were telling people to get the vaccine.
Exactly.
Fix the dry throat.
I got the same thing here. That's why I've been drinking water.
The rewatching it, I had not realized that one of my biggest childhood crushes is in this movie. And I'll share with you, I had 5 huge crushes when I was a child. 4 of them are from the same TV show: Julie Newmar, Eartha Kitt, Lee Meriwether, and I want to say Yvonne Craig. I'm always wrong. Batgirl.
Yeah, that's it.
3 Catwomans and Batgirl. Huge crushes. But the other one was Carolyn Jones, Morticia Addams.
Yeah.
Beautiful woman. Huge crush. I did not know she was in this movie.
I'd forgotten it.
When I was watching it today,
I remember Dana Winter was in it, or how he was her name Dana Winter? I think it was that plays McCarthy's girlfriend.
Yes.
I think it's Dana Winter. Spelled Winter, I think.
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, beautiful woman. And she didn't do a whole lot of things. She did a few other things and then retired. But yeah, those are. I had mine was also in Net Funicello and I can't think of her name right now, but she was in a lot of the Disney movies. Haley Mills.
Yes.
You know, when I was a kid, those were among mine too.
But just watching this, I'm looking closely at this. I think that's Morticia Adams. And watching the credits,
I forgot about that.
Sam Peckinpah has a cameo.
Yeah, Sam Peckinpah. You know, right? Sam worked for Don Siegel, who directed it, and it's interesting that Don Siegel went on to do some Clint Eastwood movies and some other movies. A great director. He's one of my favorite directors, in fact. And Sam, I think there's a scene where you see him running up the hill as one of the pod people. I'm not going to swear to that, but I believe that's it, because I believe once I looked at that, I said, I think that's Sam Peckinpah.
He's the, if I have the character name correct, he's the gas man in the doctor's basement. So I didn't notice. I didn't know.
And I think you see him running up the hill later. He's with the crowd. They're all running up the hill. And what's interesting is Don Siegel's in the remake. He's the cab driver. In fact, Kevin McCarthy's in the remake, and he's coming and he picks up right where he left off, where we think it ought to end, with him saying they're coming, they're out there. And so I thought that was kind of clever. But Siegel is the cab driver in that.
Okay. I didn't realize that. I knew that Kevin McCarthy was in it, but didn't realize that the director was. And Don Siegel made Alcatraz, Dirty Harry, all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah. Coogan's Bluff, I think, was him. Yeah. Did he direct that? I'm not sure, but I think so.
I think I saw
like
that.
His directing.
Looking through his, I was looking through his credits.
Clint Eastwood's directing is very influenced by Don Siegel. His directing looks very similar. He's got a sort of direct approach.
Let's see. I'm on IMDb doing a quick look at Don Siegel's directing. I think I went to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He did some Twilight Zone, it looks like.
I didn't know that. Was that some of the later Twilight Zone or the
Lloyd Bridges original show? 59 to 64, 2 episodes of the original.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm trying to get to the more.
I should know that.
Yeah, Coogan's Bluff. He did Coogan's Bluff, Death of a Two Mules for Sister Sarah.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
So
I think he did the Beguiled too. No, either I think
Yep, the Beguiled.
He did the Beguiled, didn't he? Or Clint Eastwood starred in that one too.
Yeah, he did the Beguiled. He did Telephone, which is a Charles Bronson.
I forgot about that. Charles Bronson. Yeah.
Escape from Alcatraz. Yeah. He's got a great catalog of stuff.
He's one of my favorite directors, and Clint Eastwood's directing is very similar. It comes from that, there's a lot of directors I like, but he's one of my favorites. It's like John Sayles. I love him because he's just kind of a straightforward kind of director, and he relies on the story and relies on the characters. He's not overly fancy, and every once in a while he'll do some kind of cool shot, but mostly he kind of puts the camera there and says, okay, tell your story, and he'll move it, but he's not a big camera mover. Where you had like Roger Corman, the camera was always moving when he directed himself. When he was directing them himself, that camera was moving. And I think he said he fought the whole Korean War with 2 guys in a bush, but he was a creative director that never really got as much attention for his directing as he did for producing a lot of low budget films. And he was certainly one of the early heroes of mine. I mean, a lot of those movies are just awful, and a lot of them don't hold up at all, but the best of them, some of those that he did with Vincent Price, that Charles Beaumont and Richard Matheson wrote, those are fantastic.
I'll tell you what, one of my favorite movies from when I was a kid, and it may be just nostalgia at this point, is Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, I love that too. I like the remake musical better. I really love that musical, and I never thought I would. And I thought, man, this is fantastic. But I do like the old original too.
As a kid,
Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, it made me afraid to go out in the yard in my bare feet because I thought there might be plants out there that would bite me.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there's certainly some that might give you poison ivy. We we have that here. Yeah.
but in Body Snatchers, I did notice some, I feel, creative shots. The one that really stood out to me was towards the
Oh,
end
very, very much.
when the doctor and Becky, Miles and Becky, are on the run from all the people and they run into the mine. There's a shot
Yeah, the boards.
that's yeah, but it's they're getting into the boards. The shot is from inside the mine shooting outside the mine.
Right, looking up.
And as they get underground and they're adjusting the boards to hide themselves, and we're seeing the mob from very, very far away, just getting closer, closer,
Oh, yeah.
closer, closer. And he finally gets his hands out under the boards, and the mob gets in, and it's just a long shot, and it's just really well done.
Yeah.
And then
Oh, there's plenty of them. Yeah. He's got a lot of that. But he makes it look so natural, you know, you don't notice it. And when you notice that one, you know, that was probably the most memorable shot in the entire film. But it's actually got a lot of others that are more subtle. You know, when they first discovered that first pod, the way that's shot and the way they're looking at the pod, if you go back and look at that itself is just beautifully framed. You know, it's a great shot.
Oh yeah, a lot of it just wonderful directing, camera work, snappy dialogue. I love some of the back and forth again between Miles and Becky. I liked it was Jack and Teddy, which is Carolyn Jones and
Right.
King Donovan.
Yeah.
Just the interaction between the characters. A lot of fun and frightening as well. The idea
Absolutely. I like to say it's one of my favorite films, and it's also one of the most influential films because there are tons of other films that aren't direct remakes of this that are very similar. And again, I go back to Invaders from Mars. I think that's actually a very influential film, even though it's not as adult or doesn't hold up all the way through. But that first 20, 30 minutes of it is just, and it's very noirish. It's got, you know, it's got these shadow shots and things that are just gorgeous and very interesting. And it's frightening, especially if you're young. But the Body Snatchers is such a good example of science fiction of that era that it holds up now. And if you see it now, it's the same impact as it had originally, I think, you know, and I've shown it to, I remember showing it to my kids, and I've shown it to friends that were, you know, younger and never seen the film, and they were like, wow, this is a good movie. They all comment on that kind of ending where it has that happy ending, you know. But it's a wonderful film, and it's influenced so many films that aren't exactly about pods, but they're about aliens taking over or about other people taking over. And you know, it's and even when you look at it, just that scene with everybody running up the hill after our hero and his girlfriend, that looks a whole lot like Night of the Living Dead.
Mm-hmm.
The way they're running up the hill there, you know, they're not zombies, but they kind of are in a different way. And so you see all these things, there's all these fingers that connect different stuff, you know, and make it, it makes it a classic because of its influence and the fact that people can say pod people and most people know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you talk about influence. I'm a fan of full moon movies, the cheesy, low budget, B grade movies like the Puppet Master series and everything. And they have a movie called Seed People.
Oh, okay.
Which is a very low budget, cheesy, essentially take on Invasion of the Body Snatchers, except there's some alien pod creatures as well. But it's a fun little movie. And then
right, what wasn't there one of Stephen King's novels where people were sort of transformed by aliens and the aliens took over? I'm trying to I may have him confused with some of the other. It would be like kind of his middle period if it is him.
That be
Seems like
Tommy?
there's a flying saucer has landed, and people are influenced by that saucer, but it could be something totally different.
Well, I think Tommy Knockers has a flying saucer in it.
That's it. That's
Okay.
it. But aren't people influenced and changed by that, or something?
No,
It's
I
been
have
so
not.
long
That's
ago,
one that I have
don't
not
remember.
read yet. So
Yeah, it's not one of my favorites of his, and I like a lot of his stuff. I think that he's the king for a reason, but I that one I don't remember as much as some of the others. His early novels and some of the more recent ones like 11/22/63 and what is it? What is it, Revelation or Resurrection, or I can't remember.
Revival?
It's one that I think came just after the Lovecraftian one,
is that
and
Revival?
then the one that may be it, and then the other one he did, the Outsider. Those were scary as hell. But what the Outsider is, he's something that looks like other people. He looks like a regular person, but he isn't. And so when you look at it, there's a lot of that. There's a tremendous amount of that influence in fiction and in film.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have, there's a gap in my Stephen King where I stopped reading him for quite a while. And I'm back on the bandwagon.
Somewhere in the middle, I'm not as well read there.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch.
Yeah, I think somewhere after Misery or Christine in there, I don't remember which one came first. And then It was the one that a lot of people love. It for some reason that wasn't the one for me. And he certainly knew what he was doing, but that one didn't get me like some of the others. And so I remember loving The Green Mile, and then some of the later ones, the stuff he's been doing lately, I've liked a lot of that, and the sort of crime novels that he's been doing, or at least crime-like novels that he did for what was it, Hard Case
Yeah.
Crime, things like that. So he's one of our masters, that's for sure.
Well, when I read The Outsider, that was the book that introduced me to his character Holly Gibney, who is now one of my favorite Stephen King character. And I had to go and buy.
She was in a previous book.
I had to go and buy
Mr.
Mercedes. And
I haven't read that one.
I loved it. I love her character, and she's in the three. Bill Gaines, is that his name? The three. It's Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. Is sort of that trilogy.
I haven't read any of those, but I'll have to. I'll need to go back and read them now.
I fell in love with her in The Outsider, so had to get those. And I've only read Mr. Mercedes of those three so far, but absolutely love that.
Stephen King is another example of a person who's a natural storyteller. I mean, he's someone that's telling you a story. He can write, and he has undercurrents of other things going on in his work, which is, what I admire about him. I remember when I first read him, everybody was talking about this bestseller guy that was taking over the horror field. And I read him and I thought, well, there's a reason for that. He's good. And he knows the stuff. He knows our stuff. He's one of us. He's grown up on the stuff we've grown up with, the comics, the films, the books, and the stories, and, the TV shows and all that. He had the same essentially fathers and mothers that we did as far as creativity went. And yet he also understood. He had a greater sense of literature. He understood what that was doing. He had a sense of pop literature, like Peyton Place, and like, Salem's Lot's Dracula and Peyton Place kind of blended together. And when I read those, I got, and I still stand by it. I think he is one of the geniuses of not only genre fiction, but I think there's certain books of his that are going to be read a long damn time. He really knew what he was doing, or knows what he is doing. And though I have some books I didn't like as well as others, and I went through a period where I just quit reading horror. I don't blame him. I just had enough, and even now, though I read horror, I don't read a lot of it. I have to be really excited about something to read it. Sometimes they send me something to read and I read it, I like it or I don't like it. But I don't feel driven to read one kind of fiction. I read all kinds of stuff. Right now I'm reading Ace Atkins' Spencer novel, Bye Bye Baby, and I'm loving it. I'm enjoying it. And then I'm also I read one upstairs and one downstairs, the Tender Bar, which the reason I'm reading it was made into a Netflix film, which was terrific. And I thought, okay, I want to read that. And so far, I'm loving that book too. I read one in different locations. I'm bad about that. And plus, I have stacks of comics and things like that. So I reread a lot of the classic literature. And I think if you're going to be a writer and you have to respect writing, not just a kind of writing, but writing. And you're not going to like everything, but if you reach out, you're going to be surprised at what you do like. And that's one of the things I admire about Stephen King. He's very well read and he's very well thought. And when he writes, it's not just coming from one source, it's coming from multiple sources,
Well, I'm going to share an anecdote, and some of my viewers have heard this before, but I think it illustrates how a reader's taste can change, how one's attitude can affect one's reading. Back in, I think, 91, I read Pet Sematary. And for decades after that, I've been telling people it is the second most boring book I have ever read. Absolutely hated it. And then last year I decided to reread it. I was like, I always like to give things a second chance. It is now one of my favorite Stephen King novels.
I love that book.
Absolutely loved it. But the first time I read it, it bored the hell out of me. So I don't know if I was just
terrified.
I don't know if I was
for me it was.
What's that?
Yeah, I said for me, I think Stephen King and I have kids, and he had young kids then, and I think our kids are just a little younger than Stephen's boys. Owen and Joe, and I forget what the daughter's name is right now. I'm having a blank, but his kids were, general range, especially the two boys, and Keith and my daughter Casey. And so when I was reading that, I was really getting those vibes because we were, we had young children. And so it was much more powerful to me. And the fact that I love animals so much, and you got a Pet Cemetery. I mean, our beloved pit bull just, we had to have put to sleep last week, and I'm not over it yet. And the thing is that when I was reading it, it was the perfect time for me to be reading it, I think. Because I think had we not had kids, it wouldn't have hit me the same way. Or had I been, I think being a little older, it hits you too. I think even if you don't have kids and you're a little older, I think the impact is about mortality is much more, I think it's more impactful to you as you grow older. Everything about mortality begins to have a weight. But there was something, I think it was an introduction I read, and it's something that Stephen wrote and said that I thought he said that, when your children are born, you see the writing on your tombstone. And I thought, yeah, I get that. And there's a thing where he talks about in Pet Cemetery, or no, it's another introduction, but it's the concepts in Pet Cemetery is where, it knocks them out of their shoes. You just, that kid's knocked completely out of their shoes. And to me, that was one of the most horrifying images and one of the most true images that you could imagine. And that's what makes Stephen King special from a lot of other writers, that he's not just trying to horrify you or gross you out. He's doing that too. And people forget how powerful those novels were as far as the gross factor when they came out. It's just that things got grosser later and they don't seem as much now. Robert Bloch at one point was one of our grossest writers. And he was like, upset at some of the grossness. And I thought, Bob, when you were doing this, you were the guy. It's how it works, and it circles back, and you're getting, I think, a variety of kinds of fictions now. But I think that was the thing about King. He was a thinking man's writer who knew how to tell a story. And I always thought he did himself a disservice by saying he was like the Big Mac of literature, because people latched onto that to put him down, because that's not what he is. He might have a Big Mac here and there. I mean, we all do. The thing is, if you're a writer and you're a professional writer, like Stephen King, like myself, like many other writers, and that's what you do, that's how you make your living, you're going to give it regular exercise. And like Stephen King, he probably doesn't need the money anymore, but he is a writer, and you can't quit. You're constantly bombarded with creativity or ideas or things that you want to express. But even if you're that, you do over a period of time, you're going to have some things that aren't as good as others. But the best of his work is really not a Big Mac. It's filet mignon. It's wonderful stuff. I think he he is underrated by the mainstream because he is so prolific. And, you know, I remember people that when I think he got like Bradbury, they both got some kind of medal from the National Book Award, I think it was. And there were people that were just so upset that these guys, especially Stephen, was getting this. And I thought, how many people have read you and have read Stephen King and will remember him? And to me, I think that's what makes literature. When you look back, like at Mark Twain, his stuff was just considered, you know, popular junk.
Right.
And now we look at it differently. Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer and so many other books, you know, Pudd'nhead Wilson, all that stuff. It's when you look at it now from this perspective of time, you go, my God, that guy was ahead of all these people. And you have the other people that were the big stars that were the literary. Nobody knows who the hell they are anymore. Nobody reads them.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
But
I don't want
to
to
be reading Stephen lot long after they've been reading some of the others who are more given more literary accolades.
Yes.
You know.
Exactly. I don't want to keep you forever. So, any final thoughts on Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
I just think that it's probably one of the top science fiction as well as horror films, and a great noir film too, if you want to, at least from the way it looks, that's ever been made, you know. And I think that even if you love the second one, which I do too as well, it comes from that source. And even if he was influenced by invaders from Mars, he found the right vehicle. He found a way to express it. And again, I go back to saying that small town thing was really effective because it's about people you know. And I think that looking, as we said earlier, is looking at now and then going back and reading that novel, it's even more frightening. It's because he really tapped into something that, you know, when you're a kid, it's just a scary story, you know, it's hitting you on these levels, but you don't know what they are. Then when you get older, you start to see something else about them. And then now it doesn't seem that far-fetched that people can be influenced and changed. And you have to wonder, is there some kind of, maybe the QAnon people are right, it's some kind of alien stuff.
Could be.
And it's changed. Yeah. Only they think it's the other people, you know.
Of
and
course.
That to me makes it a classic novel. And just like I said earlier, it's a classic film or novels because you can say pod people and people know what you're talking about. They know, even people have not even seen the movie,
right,
or necessarily read the book, they know what that means. Pod people, they at least know, generally speaking, what that means. And again, you go back to the influence on so many writers, and Finney's a big influence on me. And you know, Matheson, that was his favorite writer, was Jack Finney, or at least in some things I've seen that where he spoke about favorite writers was Jack Finney. So, you know, there's a guy who wrote one book, which he said was just to entertain, and I'm sure it was, but man, did it have a lot going on in that simplistic, wonderful sort of narrative style that he has. It's so much just a storyteller, but it had a lot going on, and its impact is immeasurable. Can't beat that.
Absolutely. All right. So before we go, do you have anything that you want to plug? Anything new coming out that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, right now I have Radiant Apples that's out, which is from Subterranean, which is a small press, and it's not a sequel, but it's in a storyline about a character named Nat Love. Paradise Sky was a big book. There's Black Hat Jack. There's some others, but it's out right now from Subterranean. And then coming out in March is Born for Trouble, which is Hap and Leonard. It's a number of Hap and Leonard novellas collected by Tachyon Books, and I think it's pretty good. I'm excited about it, and it's more playing on their more adventurous story side, and I like I said before, doing different things with them. So that's what that is. And then towards the end of the year, I have I forget if it's a novel or a short story collection coming out from Subterranean. One I have coming out that I won't mention yet because he hasn't mentioned it, but okay. I can say there's something coming out, and so watch for that. But right now, Radiant Apples, forthcoming, Born for Trouble.
Nice. And do you would you care to tell people where they can find you online?
Yeah, I'm easy to find. People try to say, pick me as a friend for Facebook, but I don't do Facebook. I'm on a Facebook page because they make you be on one of those if you have a fan page. If you want anything to connect with me at all, go to the fan page. And there's a, a www.joerlansdale spot where you can go and, read about what's going on in my career and what's coming out. And it overlaps with the fan page. And then I'm on Twitter. And there's also a Joe Lansdale collector page, which is a lot of fun. I go there to find out what I wrote sometimes. and to they know more than I do. And a lot of them have more of my work than I have, which is unfortunate for me. Ooh. But those are all easy to find. They're available.
All right. I'll have links for some of those in the description below. Okay. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
If you can just hang out while I do my outro,
sure,
and stick around for a minute once I stop recording.
Sure.
But so folks, thank you very much to Joe Lansdale for being here. If you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the YouTube stuff. And that's it. So until next time, folks, read more books. And where is stop recording? There we go.